Hi, my name is Dave, and today I'm going to show you this beautiful Tinsley 4-inch refractor, classic refractor from the 1940s, American-made telescope from that era, and it has some wonderful characteristics that I absolutely adore. When I bought the telescope, it did not have the original finder, and I wanted something that was at least close to the original, so I tried to make a replica of the finder. And the finder rings, especially the finder rings, are a little bit tricky. And there are some other obvious changes. For example, these things up here, certainly not original. These were originally cheesehead kind of bolts. And I'm not sure what was originally here. Just a couple of bolts, simple bolts. And I, of course, being an amateur machinist, I wanted to make something a little fancier, a little nicer. And it's nice, when I do that, I try to approach it with the philosophy of doing something that can be easily reverted right back to the originals. Also, the adjustment tensioner here was not original, so I reconstructed and tried to replicate that as best I could. A few other things about the scope. Originally, the brass parts would have been painted black. And I like brass, so I wanted to show off the brass, so I removed the paint. And of course that can easily be, I mean, the paint wasn't original on it anyway, so that could easily be reconstructed should that be desirable. Anyway, I really like it. I like the little brass bling on it a little bit here and there. In addition to that, when I made these changes to the telescope, I added a feature that is very desirable, and that is that I wanted to be able to adjust the tension here on the altitude. Hauling out a great big screwdriver and adjusting the tension on that thing is not the most pleasant way to do things. So I made these little knurled knobs that you can easily adjust the tension. And what I really like about this scope is that when you adjust the tension almost to zero tension, I've got this thing balanced perfectly. And I can add a little bit of tension should I want to. So I can add a bit of tension. You can also tension up this very, very nice, this device here is wonderful. It's spring-loaded, and it's a very nice friction device for azimuth. Anyway, when this telescope is tensioned properly, it's a dream. It's an absolute dream. The telescope performs beautifully. I've got a lot of 4-inch telescopes, a lot of unitrons and so forth. This compares very nicely. It's probably as good as any unitron I have, and compares with the very best 4-inch modern ED Apo telescopes that you can buy. So it's a very, very, very nice telescope, superb, and a real pleasure, a real nice pleasure to operate the telescope. But I wanted you to notice how easy this is to move. I mean, it's just very, very easy to move. Fingertip light with this tension adjustment. Once you get it balanced and everything, it is beautiful. And of course the trick is, when you change the eyepiece, it's gonna want to wander on you a little bit, so you might want to tension it up just a bit. That way when you change the eyepiece, you still have enough friction to hold it, and yet it's still... And then the nice thing is that you can easily adjust that, so it's now much more adjustable. Fingertip adjustments for that. So I'm delighted with that little change, and of course you can go back to the original should you be an absolute purist. The finder is it's actually a 7x35 binocular objective with a nice crosshair eyepiece. Works wonderfully, and it's pretty much as the original would have been. So it's a very nice little telescope, really nice to use. I'll show you. I'll give you some close-ups of how you adjust some of these things. Okay, so to adjust the tension on the azimuth, you got a couple of spring is turning, but it doesn't matter, it's just floating there. So all you're doing here is by tightening this, you're adjusting the tension. You have extremely nice control of the tension on the azimuth, and this of course that's just a lockdown, so it'll hold the adjustment. Now when you turn the telescope, stuff is turning. There's a bronze bearing up here and so forth. stuff is turning, and but it's just perfect. It works out very, very nicely. Okay, I wanted to show you how to adjust the tension on the azimuth. Now these are just a couple of bolts. Fancy bolts, of course. You know, being a machinist, I made these they have to sit in there. There's a little socket there they have to sit into. And believe it or not, there's a preferred way for these holders to go on there. So I made a couple little tiny marks here so I can tell when I'm reassembling it, I can tell what to do. So that's how that works. You can adjust it very nicely to a very high tension if you want. In a stiff breeze or something. Well, of course, if you're observing in a stiff breeze, you're kind of crazy anyway. But if you're observing in a stiff breeze, you can really tighten these down quite well. And it'll hold, I mean, it's nice and stiff now. I designed these things to be more or less permanent. If you want to adjust them or remove them, you just put a nail here or something. And you can take those out. It's just a special head on here. I got the idea from some other antique scopes I'd seen like this. And it's fine because what I intend here is for the cradle to stay attached to the scope forever, more or less, in that position, because the balance is perfect that way. You don't have to rebalance it or worry about any of that kind of nonsense. So that stays right where it is. This is how you adjust the tension there. Let me show you how the focuser works. This is backwards from what you're used to. When you're turning this way, it's going in. Turning that way, it's going out. And you can see what's happening. A little bit coarse and a little bit, you know, that's old school. In the olden days, that's the way a focuser worked. And it's a bit tricky compared to a modern 2-speed hyper smooth Crayford kind of focuser. It's not the same thing. This is old style, this is old school. That's the way we did it back in those days. Okay, here's the finder. This is about a 7x35 finder, and I tried to replicate the finder mounts, the finder rings on an original Tinsley as best I could from photographs. I'll show you some close-ups of how I made that. Anyway, that's the way that works. You'll notice here it doesn't have any, it's a little bit like an Alvin Clark in that respect. It doesn't have any screws up here. It doesn't have any adjustments. It's just a friction fit in here. No, it seems to work fine. It's just fine. It works great. No problems. I hope you've enjoyed my tour of this charming Tinsley from the 1940s. Thank you.